After talking about this idea of WWE doing another draft on last week's show, it looks like they're really going through with this. It'll begin, supposedly, on the October 11th episode of Smackdown on Fox, which would mark the first time one of these drafts has started on Smackdown and not on Raw, and it will extend through Raw the following Monday, which falls on Columbus Day. So this is really happening, and they're said to be very serious about wanting brand exclusivity this time and doing away with the Wildcard rule, and Fox wants this draft to take on a more sports-like presentation. I'm reading all of the right things. That's checking all of the boxes. But until I see it with my own eyes, I won't believe it. Until we're 6 months in, with no crossover between the brands, I won't believe it. In fact, we will have crossover the very next month, because it's Survivor Series, which means Raw versus Smackdown, the one night of year, but not really, where superstars from Raw face off with the superstars from Smackdown. So the timing is a little suspect, but since we're getting a draft, I did say last week that I would chime in and I would share my roster moves and thoughts, what I would do, moves I would make, and so here they are. From Raw to SmackDown, who would I move from the Raw roster to the SmackDown Live roster once SmackDown goes to Fox? The first name, the biggest name that pops in my head is Brock Lesnar. And Brock Lesnar is featured pretty heavily in all the advertising for SmackDown. I mean, I guess he's going to be on that first show on October 4th with Sting and Goldberg. There's going to be a lot of people on that show. Undertaker may or may not be there. But Brock Lesnar, I look at him and I say, what is left for him to do on Monday Night Raw? He has been part of the Raw roster since he came back to the company in 2012. He used to be a SmackDown guy. That was many, many years ago. He was the face of the SmackDown brand. He was carrying the SmackDown brand. But you're going back now to the end of 2002, 2003, into the beginning of 2004. It's a long time ago since Brock was truly a SmackDown guy. They're going to Fox. Brock is still a big name. You know, there's a lot of reports. Fox wants Brock on the show. Who knows what Fox wants? Only Fox knows what Fox wants. I don't know if Fox wants Brock or not. Ronda Rousey, there was rumor that they wanted Ronda. Ronda hurt her finger. I mean, you could draft her. I don't know when she'll be able to wrestle again. She got hurt pretty badly. But I do think Brock Lesnar not only will probably be moving to SmackDown, but if it were up to me, I would shift him over to the SmackDown brand too. Paul Heyman is the interesting little wild card here because Paul Heyman now is the executive director for Monday Night Raw. He's sitting at the gorilla position every week next to Vince McMahon and with Triple H. He's not writing the shows, but he's obviously steering the creative vision of the shows. He's got his favorites that he's been putting on the show, supposedly. You know, Bobby Roode's a favorite of his. Cedric Alexander is a favorite of his. We're already seeing the Heyman influence, not to its full effect, I don't think, but we're starting to see his influence seep through on Monday Night Raw. Now, is he backstage at SmackDown every week anyway? I don't think so. Will he, have to go on the road now with SmackDown if Brock moves over? Because I would not want to separate the two of them. If Brock Lesnar is going to continue to appear on TV, Heyman should be with him. But let's be honest. Even when they go to Fox, if Fox wants him a little more often, how often are we really going to see Brock Lesnar on television? Not very often. And then you got a handful of pay-per-view matches. Paul Heyman can do both. I would imagine that if they wanted Paul Heyman to make appearances here and there on the SmackDown brand, that would not be a problem. So I don't really see that being an obstacle to anything. He'd be making limited appearances anyway. Heyman does not really show up on television on Raw. He's behind the scenes, but it's not like he's a Raw roster guy. I would move Brock over to SmackDown. It opens up a few additional possibilities as far as new opponents for him. Who knows who they may call up from NXT, so that's what I would do with Brock. Sasha Banks. Sasha Banks now, she went from purple hair to blue hair. Would make sense to put the girl with the blue hair on the blue brand. I mean, that's not the only reason I would move her. Bayley, I would keep Bayley on SmackDown. I wouldn't split the two of them up. I want to see where this whole heel Sasha, heel Bayley thing goes. I would keep them, not as a tag team, but I would keep them together. And so I would shift Sasha Banks over to the SmackDown brand. She's already having that first match at Clash of Champions with Becky Lynch. I mean, they could continue their feud and have another 2 or 3 pay-per-view matches and kind of run that into the ground. But then what? Then what? She's already beaten up Natalya. Once she's done with Becky, what's next for Sasha? I say shift Sasha over after this first Becky match. Shift her over to the Smackdown brand. I mean, Lord knows that the women's division on SmackDown could use the help. Got the Revival. I would want to keep their alliance intact with Randy Orton. And if Randy Orton is going to be a SmackDown guy and I would not move him over to Raw, I would hate for that little alliance to come to an end. Revival, they've won the Raw Tag Team titles a few times. I kind of look at them the same way I look at Brock and I say, what's left for them on the Raw brand? Another series of matches with the Usos? I would move the Revival over to SmackDown. And last but not least is Cesaro. I would, if it were up to me, and I'm going to talk about this in the mailbag because somebody sent the question in, but if it were up to me, at least for a limited run, I would move him over to the NXT UK brand. I'm sure he'd love that. I would move him to the NXT UK brand long enough to build to a takeover match against Walter, where he puts Walter over. That's what I would do. I don't think they're going to do that, but I would at least want to move him over to SmackDown, give him a nice change of scenery, a change of opponents. I mean, the guy got pinned by The Miz on TV last week. I mean, The Miz needed the win, but come on. Get Cesaro off Raw, put him on SmackDown. Then we shift over to the SmackDown brand. Who would I move over from SmackDown to Monday Night Raw? Daniel Bryan. I would move Daniel Bryan off of SmackDown. I would put Daniel Bryan on Monday Night Raw. Gives him some new faces to get in the ring with. You've got Seth Rollins, you've got Braun Strowman, you've got Samoa Joe. You've got different crop of talent, a different crop of stars that he can mix it up with and work with on that brand. Finn Balor. I would move Finn Balor over from SmackDown to Raw, which presents a few intriguing possibilities, not the least of which is they could potentially do something where he either links up with AJ Styles in the OC or even feuds with AJ. I wouldn't mind him joining them for a while, then maybe you do a split and then you can build to a big match maybe between them at WrestleMania or something, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So there's always that, because I would keep AJ, Anderson, and Gallows exactly where they are. But the other thing, and the main reason I would move Balor over, is because The Fiend is a part of the Raw roster right now. I know he's been popping up wherever he wants to pop up. If you go to WWE.com, officially, he is on the Raw roster. And if he's going to be challenging for the Universal Championship, then he sure as hell better be a part of the Raw roster. I think when Balor comes back, you build to a rematch with him and The Fiend, but it's, Balor is the demon. You can't do that match. Well, you know what, though? I take that back. If the idea is for Balor to come back and build, and I don't know if this is the plan, but you're going to build to a rematch at Survivor Series, which is what I figured all along. He'll lose at SummerSlam. He'll disappear for a few months, come back. If his sabbatical is only for 2 months or so, he'll be back in time for Survivor Series, and you do the rematch there. Survivor Series is Raw versus SmackDown. So they could get away with having them on separate brands and actually still do that match if they wanted to. Any other show, though, if they're going to be serious about this brand split, they have to be on the same roster. But either way, I would move Balor over from SmackDown, move him back to Raw, so that he can do, whatever he's going to do with The Fiend, and then he'll, have Daniel Bryan on the brand. He could do stuff with him in the OC and AJ Styles. It's just a more interesting crop of guys for him to work with than what I see for him right now on SmackDown. Rusev and Lana. There's been a lot of reports about them, that they're very unhappy, that they're potentially on the outs with WWE. I don't know what's going on with Rusev and Lana. Rusev's had some fun with it on his Twitter, making fun of, so-called internet reporters who have said things about him that have turned out to be bullshit. So I don't know what his status is. I don't know how much time is left on his contract. I look at him and Lana and I see two people who clearly, to me, in my eyes, are not happy. How could they be happy? How could Rusev be happy with how he has been treated? How could Rusev be happy with how he has been booked? He's done. Look, he was on Lillian Garcia's podcast a number of months ago, and he was actually pretty brutally honest, I thought, about his feelings about a lot of different things and how he tries to pitch new ideas and it's just hard to break through. And they have the Rusev Day thing, and yeah, they ended up putting out some merch, but then they killed it. And now it's not a thing anymore. And just you listen to him talk and you can hear the frustration in his voice. Lana outwardly voicing that same frustration. I don't need a dirt sheet or a newsletter to tell me that these are two people who are not happy with their position in WWE. And absolutely WWE has dropped the ball with Rusev. Not saying he has to be the Universal Champion or the WWE Champion. But how this guy, you could do the Bulgarian Brute. I like his personality. I think he seems like a fun guy to be around. He's a funny guy. Yeah, they tapped into that for a while. They did the thing with him and Aiden English, but for him to be sitting on the sidelines collecting dust and not doing anything is a waste of talent. And frankly, if he's only got a number of months left on his deal, I'd rather he just sit out, if that's what he wants to do, and go somewhere else. But I don't know that he's going to be able to do that. WWE has tried to hold people before. If they're not working, if they're not on the road, if they're not wrestling, they can roll their contract over, or they can, if they were off because of an injury, they tack extra time onto their contract. We hear stories like this all the time. Look what they did to Luke Harper. Look at the purgatory that Luke Harper is in right now. Sitting on his ass at home doing nothing. He tried to be nice about the whole thing. He put a public statement out. He wanted everything to be cordial. He wasn't happy where he was in his career. And WWE saw AEW and said, we ain't letting you go. I guarantee you if AEW wasn't sprouting up as the new kid on the block, Luke Harper would already be working somewhere else. He tried to get out at the exact wrong time. His situation is it reminds me a little bit of the Killer Cross situation, which is another sad situation. I'll talk about him later. But Rusev is in this weird situation also where I'm sure he would love to go somewhere else and prove his worth, whether it's AEW, Ring of Honor, New Japan. Look, the list of options for him, I'm sure, will be very long. He's a very talented guy. Why do I bring him up now? I bring him up now and here because I'd like to think maybe they just don't know what to do with him. And maybe this draft, and if they're going to be serious about splitting the brands, maybe this could be a fresh start. Maybe this could be a new opportunity for them, especially if they don't want to lose him. I mean, they gave Anderson and Gallows a little bit of a push. They gave the Revival a little bit of a push. The key word there being little bit, you'll notice, right? They want to make them happy just long enough to re-sign them. And then no doubt they'll slide right back down to the spot they were in before. But hey, we got you locked up now for the next 5 years. Joke's on you. Even though I'm sure they're making a shitload of money. Nonetheless, look, it's not always about the money with some of these guys. I would hate to go to work every day and make all this great money and hate my job. I'd want to throw myself off the roof. I don't think I could wake up every morning at 6 o'clock and look in the mirror and be happy with my life if I truly hated the people that I worked with, or I love the people I work with, but I hate my boss, or I love the people I work with, but I just hate my job. It just feels like a dead-end job. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not being creatively fulfilled. But hey, my bank account is big. Well, that's great. There are some people it's not all about that. I guess we'll find out soon if Rusev is one of those people. We'll find out next year if the Revival fall into that category. Because their contracts are going to be coming up soon too. But I'd like to think that Rusev is a guy that they just don't know what to do with. They're waiting for an opportunity to kind of put him back in the game. And this could be it. And I would move him and Lana over from SmackDown to Monday Night Raw and give the guy a fresh start. Under Paul Heyman's vision of Monday Night Raw, whatever that vision looks like. And let's kind of hit the reset button on Rusev and see how far we can go with this guy. But I say that not knowing what his contract situation is. He may just be sitting out the remainder of his deal. But I would move him over to Raw. Another guy who would make sense to move over to Raw, I can't say that I see this, I can't say that I care much or that I see this making any difference whatsoever, is Dolph Ziggler. They want to make this thing work with Dolph Ziggler and Bobby Roode. Bobby Roode's a Raw guy. If they're serious about a brand split, you're going to split the team up already? They may go into Clash of Champions and become your Raw Tag Team Champions. If that's the case, I think it's a done deal that Dolph Ziggler moves back from SmackDown to Monday Night Raw, because you look at the roster, officially, technically, he's a SmackDown guy. Make it official and move him over to Monday Night Raw. And the other name I'll throw in there is Buddy Murphy. Buddy Murphy has had a few very impressive performances on TV. He's had a very good match with Roman Reigns, a very good match with Daniel Bryan, a very good match with Ali. You sense a pattern here? Buddy Murphy could go to Monday Night Raw. I would move him over to Monday Night Raw. Make him one of the featured stars on that brand. Buddy Murphy can make a solid United States champion. Buddy Murphy could, end up in a feud with Finn Balor or something over the U.S. title if you move Balor over as well. So Buddy Murphy is another name I would move from SmackDown to Raw. And then you have NXT. They've not said anything about the rules of this draft. They haven't even officially announced it yet, but when they do, we'll see if they announce what the rules are and if NXT is going to be part of it. I would think NXT has to be part of it in some way. How could it not be? And the biggest move that I would make, and that I think there's a very good chance is going to be made in terms of an NXT jump to one of the other two brands, is the Velveteen Dream moving from NXT to either Raw or SmackDown. If it were me, I'd put him on Monday Night Raw. The way that roster is looking, I think that could be a good landing spot for him. But I think there's a reason that he was the sole NXT star who was featured in that 2K20 commercial. And if he does drop the North American Championship to Roderick Strong next week, which I think he will, that clears a path for him to move from Raw, or to move rather to Raw, or to SmackDown. I'd put him on Raw. And I would, a guy like Matt Riddle, I would leave Matt Riddle right where he is. I would leave Matt Riddle on NXT. You've got NXT moving to USA. He could be one of the big, faces, baby faces. Bad joke. On NXT going forward. I think he's got more to accomplish there. There's no need. There's no rush. As much as I'd love to see him mixing it up with some of the top names or a Brock Lesnar or somebody, there's time for that. NXT on USA, they want to make a big deal about it. Matt Riddle should be one of the featured faces. I'd leave him right where he is. But Velveteen Dream, I think, he moves on. And I'd put him on Monday Night Raw. There's Johnny Gargano. What do you do with Johnny Gargano? Johnny Gargano is going to make some kind of announcement on NXT television next week as to his future. We'll see what he has to say. They had kind of moved Gargano to the main roster with Ciampa, and then Ciampa got hurt, and Gargano was just stuck in this weird position of not having a role. And so he just went right back to NXT, which was, I'm sure, the best thing for him. But what is left for Johnny Gargano to do in NXT? Johnny Gargano now has been in NXT for a few years. He did finally win the big one. That was the big kind of story that was left for them to tell with him, and he finally did it. He accomplished his dream. He became the champion. I don't know what his announcement's going to be when he comes out, if he's going to stay, if he's going to go. I think it's time for him to move on. I think it's time to move Johnny Gargano off of NXT onto Raw or SmackDown. I'd put Johnny on SmackDown. Put Velveteen Dream on Raw. Put Johnny Gargano on SmackDown. Tommaso Ciampa should be back soon. I think he stays in NXT. I would keep him in NXT. But I think he stays because he's made it pretty clear publicly he does not want to go to Raw or SmackDown. He wants to stay in NXT. And it's not always the talent's choice to make. I would think if he wants that badly, though, to stay in NXT, Triple H will keep him in NXT. I think his health is going to be a real obstacle to him on the main. If he ever makes it to the main roster again, I think his health is going to be a huge obstacle. He's had a lot of injuries. This neck injury was a serious one. It feels like he's kind of held together by glue at this point. I hope he goes on to have a very successful, fruitful, career and makes a lot of money, but I really don't know what his future looks like on the main roster. So Gargano I'd send off. Ciampa, though, I think stays behind. Shayna Baszler. She's another name that's been talked about. She's been the NXT Women's Champion now for a very long time. I would move Shayna over, especially if you make the move to put Sasha on SmackDown. That leaves a pretty big open void in the women's division on Monday Night Raw. I think Shayna Baszler could fill that void. And she could go right into a feud with Becky Lynch if they want to slot her right away into a feud with Becky. revenge for her friend Ronda would be an easy story for them to tell. And honestly, I could see Sasha Banks beating Becky to become the Raw Women's Champion. Becky has not dropped that belt since she won it at WrestleMania. If Sasha's not going to stay on Raw, I wouldn't do the title change. Shayna? If Shayna was going to be the new permanent fixture on Raw, then she's the one I would have Becky drop the belt to. Becky's got to drop it at some point. She's going to have to chase after it at some point. Shayna could be that person that she chases. The Street Profits. They have yet to wrestle a single match on Monday Night Raw. They act like a bunch of goofs in the back. I like the Street Profits in NXT. I hate them on Monday Night Raw. They got to start getting in the ring and mixing it up and wrestling. And I think once this draft happens, hopefully that'll be, the point in which they kind of move on from just a bunch of guys who show up backstage as the weekly narrators for the television show, and they actually get in the ring and show people what they can do. I would keep them on Raw, but I would put them in the ring. Enough of this backstage bullshit. How about from Raw or SmackDown to NXT? It's almost like a reverse draft. Like we don't usually see that. I would consider it one of the first names I thought of when I was thinking who would I move from Raw or SmackDown back to NXT? Kairi Sane. Kairi Sane going back to NXT. She sees what her friend Io Shirai has turned into and what she's done and what she's done to Candice. And Kairi has come back to NXT to try to talk her friend out of whatever this new attitude is that she has, and she could feud with Io Shirai for a while. EC3. I would move EC3 back to NX3. I would move him back to NXT just to get him the hell away from Vince McMahon. I don't know what it is that Vince McMahon hates about this guy. I don't know if he took Vince's parking spot one day in the parking lot and EC3 didn't realize he was parking in the boss's spot and Vince McMahon has held a grudge ever since. I don't know if EC3 in catering, he took the last fucking granola bar or something and Vince was pissed. God damn it. I don't know. He obviously doesn't see any value in him, because if he did, he wouldn't have booked him into oblivion like this. So the only move to make with him, moving him to SmackDown, is not good enough. SmackDown is still a Vince McMahon entity. It is still a Vince McMahon property. So is NXT. But Triple H makes it very clear, well, Vince is not going to have any hands on this show. Ha! Yeah, we'll see. I hope that's true. And if that's the case, then get EC3 the hell away from Raw and SmackDown and move him back to NXT. It might be his last shot. It might be the last chance he has to salvage a career for himself in this company. Get him the hell away from Vince McMahon and move him back to NXT. King Cuerno from Lucha Underground. The news broke this week. King Cuerno has officially signed with WWE. He is now under contract to WWE. This after suing to get out of his Lucha Underground contract. There was initially interest from WWE in signing Cuerno a few years ago. But he was and he wanted to go, but he was locked into this deal, this multi-year, multi-season deal with Lucha Underground. He was trapped, and he couldn't get out of it. He filed suit. Ivelisse, there were a bunch of people, Joey Ryan, there was a class action suit trying to get out of their Lucha Underground contracts. And they were able to obviously reach some kind of a settlement, and they were able to get out of their contracts. And now, finally, he has arrived in WWE. He's a very talented guy. I think he'll do well for himself. I would not, be thinking about the two main brands. I think he would do very well starting out in NXT. I think he'd be a great addition to the NXT roster. Now, I'm not sure if they're including NXT or, like I said, NXT or NXT UK in this draft. I think, though, Toni Storm moving from NXT UK to the main NXT brand has to be a real possibility after she dropped that women's championship last weekend to Kaylee Ray. Because that one felt like it kind of came out of left field. I mean, I know I'm not following the UK brand as closely as I am some of the other brands, week to week. But it seemed like that title change was kind of unexpected. And it came out of nowhere. Toni Storm is going to be a huge star one day when she makes her way, if she makes her way to Raw or SmackDown. She's got a great personality, great look to her. Believe me, she's going to do just fine. You could move her to one of the main brands, but I would think that the first step would be to move her to just NXT proper, now that it's going to USA, and she could build her star even higher than it was on the UK brand. Now, even though NXT is going to be on USA now, apparently there are still going to be call-ups with the idea that Raw and SmackDown, they're still the big time. I guess they still would be, given that you have to be on Raw or SmackDown to wrestle on a pay-per-view. You want to be on WrestleMania one day? I don't see any NXT matches on WrestleMania, do you? To a lot of them, they still mark out over being on the WrestleMania card. I would too if it was a big payday. Hey, shit, put me on WrestleMania. But the only way to do that is to be on Raw or SmackDown. So there are still going to be call-ups. And as far as that goes, that's where I think of somebody like a Tony Storm or Velveteen Dream or Johnny Gargano, and why I've kind of lumped them into this little mock draft that I put together here. Because I would think they have to be under consideration. I'll be disappointed if they're not, if the NXT brand or brands are not part of this draft. I think that's a big mistake. Then there's the commentary. If this is going to be a real split, Corey Graves needs to pick a side, or they need to pick a side for him. He's got to be on one show. No more of this shit where he splits his time between Raw and SmackDown. I thought Vic Joseph did a fine job when he joined the announce team a couple of weeks ago. I've heard his work, sporadically on 205 Live. But I heard him on Raw, and he kind of just fit like a glove. I thought he fit in there just fine. He wasn't, outstanding or anything, but he wasn't terrible. He wasn't, making my ears bleed. He was fine. He was even very good, I thought. Here's how I would shake up the announce teams. There's been talk now for years that Michael Cole wants to transition away from the role of lead announcer on TV, continue producing behind the scenes, do other things like that, but get away from the on-air announce position. I don't know if there's any truth to this. I've never heard Michael Cole publicly say this before. So I can't say for sure that that's what's on his mind, or maybe he felt that way, now he doesn't. I don't know. But if there is any truth to that at all, here's his chance. Here's his chance to bow out. I would put Vic Joseph as the lead play-by-play guy on Monday Night Raw with Corey Graves and a third person to be named at a later date. Because they've got to have their three-person booth. And what I would do is I would have Tom Phillips stay on SmackDown. He would be the voice of SmackDown on Fox with Byron Saxton and Renee Young. Because you're not going to get rid of Renee Young. I know a lot of people don't like her commentary and they crap on her. And by her own admission, she's not a great announcer. WWE did not hire Renee Young to be announcer. They hired Renee Young because she's got this great personality. She was a great interviewer. I really do. I think she is very much miscast right now in WWE. But Renee Young's not going anywhere. Except, possibly, from Raw to SmackDown. I would move her over to SmackDown. She could be the third person on Friday nights. It looks like she's going to be hosting some kind of a talk show, a studio show on FS1 once SmackDown moves to Fox. I don't know if that show would air live immediately after SmackDown every week. That would make it awfully tough. I don't see how she could do both unless she races from her seat to some kind of makeshift studio in the back. I'm not sure how that would work. But I see her moving over there. We were talking before, does Fox want Brock Lesnar? Who does Fox want? I don't know. I don't work for Fox. But if I'm Fox, I look at Renee Young, and yeah, I would want somebody like that hosting a studio show and doing work for our network. Absolutely. I think that's the likely destination for her. Mauro Ranallo, Nigel McGuinness, Beth Phoenix, they're staying on as the NXT announce team. And I'm fine with keeping Mauro together with Nigel. I think they're great. Michael Cole, when I say that Michael Cole should be replaced by Vic Joseph on Raw, I don't mean Michael Cole should just disappear and vanish off the face of the earth, even though sometimes when I hear him on Mondays, I wish he would. Cole can be used for special sit-down interviews, in-ring interviews, big pay-per-view matches, just not weekly television. It's weird to think Jim Ross was the voice of Monday Night Raw really from 1998 on. He only took over the lead play-by-play role from Vince McMahon after the Survivor Series day. That was pretty much the end of 97. And then during the draft in 2008, they switched him over to SmackDown for a limited amount of time. In those 10 years, there were several attempts to move him off of commentary, but they would always bring him back. So you're looking at a decade of JR as the face of Monday Night Raw. Michael Cole, who took JR's spot in that draft in 2008, has now been the face of Raw for longer than Jim Ross was. Over a decade. And he does a fine job when he's not overproduced, which is all the time. But I don't have the same attachment to Cole in that role that I did Jim Ross, because he ain't Jim Ross. You know, Jim Ross and Gorilla Monsoon, and if you're a little older, you know, Gordon Soley, it was just a different time. It was a different time. They were probably, you know, maybe trained a different way, or, you know, grew up, you know, idolizing others who did it a different way. Whatever it was, you listen to them and you listen to the announcers now, including Cole. You know, Cole comes from a news background. He was like a war correspondent and all that, but that's different than being a wrestling commentator. And he's grown into the role, and you know, he goes for the hard sell on the pay-per-views and stuff, but there's nothing genuine about him. That's always been my biggest thing about Michael Cole. And I don't know if I could blame Michael Cole or if I should blame Vince McMahon for that. The thing that Michael Cole lacks, that almost all of those guys, especially Jim Ross, maybe nobody more so than Jim Ross, and why this comparison is so damning for Michael Cole: credibility. Michael Cole, maybe because of the way he's produced, he lacks credibility. He lacks credibility with the audience. Very little of what he says and shills feels and sounds genuine. It sounds robotic. It sounds forced. I can't believe it. I can't buy into it. There's a genuineness that is lacking from Michael Cole and his commentary, and that has always been my biggest beef with him. He can call moves when he's allowed to call moves. He can show emotion. I wish every time somebody came back, how many debuts have been ruined by, oh my, could it be? I'm not a fan of that. That's a matter of personal taste, I guess. But that has always been my biggest beef with him and his style of commentary. So I would be fine with transitioning him away, you know, from Raw, at least, in favor of somebody like a Vic Joseph. And look, if it doesn't work out for some reason, Cole is still there. He's not going anywhere. You know, he's probably very helpful to the other announcers on headset. I mean, whenever we see some of these videos of Triple H holding these meetings with Matt Bloom and people down at NXT, Michael Cole, many times, is sitting in on those meetings. So he's helping Triple H. He's helping with the NXT brand as well. I think Michael Cole, in a lot of ways, is, I don't know if unsung hero is the right way to put it. He's a very valuable player for them behind the scenes in ways that I think a lot of fans don't realize. They only hear his voice on TV, and they either like him or they hate his guts, but they don't look at what he probably contributes beyond that. So he's going to be there. He's probably a lifer, and he can continue to help and contribute in other ways. And if it doesn't work out, then guess what? Michael Cole can go right back on TV. No different than when they would take Jim Ross off TV, and somehow they always kept coming back to good old JR. Some creative changes, as first reported by The Observer. Ryan Ward, who had been the lead writer for Smackdown and before that NXT, is taking a leave of absence after getting married. I'm sure he must be thrilled every week when Vince McMahon rips up his scripts. I would take a leave of absence too if I were him. In his place, leading SmackDown as it heads to Fox, will be Ed Koskey, working with Eric Bischoff, who he previously worked with when Bischoff was on TV as the Raw GM. That's how long Koskey's been around for. Jonathan Beckstrom, who had been involved with 205 Live before being moved over to the Raw brand, will now be the new head writer for Monday Night Raw. That's the role that Brian Gewirtz, once upon a time, and I guess before him, Vince Russo, once occupied. Now it's going to be Jonathan Beckstrom working under Paul Heyman. I really want to believe that these men will have the autonomy that they need to create distinct brand identities for these shows. I really do. I want to believe it. But until we see evidence of this, as far as I'm concerned, it's all just hot air. You can move the chess pieces around all day long, but it's the same person playing the game.